Hello, everyone. This is Dwayne Sr and Tony Tresselt, and our guest today is Tom Dunlap. And I want to welcome you, Tom, to another episode of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast. And it's the podcast where tree people talk about tree stuff and how being part of the trees and tree work and has affected their lives professionally, but also how being part of the trees has affected your life personally. We don't have an agenda and we don't have a script. We just let it flow. But we always kind of start off by asking our guest, how do you explain or where do you feel your journey in the trees began? Where did your acorn germinate?
Well, I grew up in a camping and outdoors family. And when I was a year and a half old, we went, I don't remember it, but I've got pictures, so I know I was there. My folks took my sister and I, and we camped from Minneapolis to Niagara Falls and back. So I've been camping my whole life, and outdoors and stuff. And then, family camping in the woods and Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts and on up to wilderness camping. And of course, tree work in the wild woods too. So I've been an outdoors guy my whole life. And I remember, I've thought about this, like how did I become connected with trees? And I have a really good memory of going up with my dad up to cousin's land in August and hiking in the woods. And Dad had a little bucket of paint, and he'd paint a big slosh, a blaze on a tree in the woods. And we'd come back in the fall and dig that tree out of the woods and bring it back into Minneapolis and plant it. So I was out bare rooting trees when I was 7, 8 years old. And my dad died about 12, 15 years ago, I think 15 now. And I would love to know how he knew about bare rooting, but he just knew it. So.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
So was this like an annual ritual, like an annual thing? And how long did it go on for?
Well, we did it. I remember going up 8 or 10 times, I suppose. Sometimes a couple of Saturdays. Dad got, as the word got around to his friends of having trees, we'd go up a couple times in the fall. So, through my adolescent years, we were digging trees out of the woods, and rescuing trees. And I still do that. I still do that. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was walking the dog last spring, it was a year ago, about a year ago exactly, this time of year. And they had done some road work a couple kilometers from the house where I was walking, and I noticed this nice little willow. It was just a nice, perfect little shape, and it was going to suffer from what had been going on. So I went home and grabbed a bucket, and I didn't bare root it, but I brought it home and transplanted it, and it sprouted back this year and it's growing along. But it just reminded me of that, and I just plucked it out of the wild basically and gave it a home.
Just before I came in the house, I was looking at a catalpa tree I've got in my front yard, and I dug it out of the edge of a woods that was going to get mowed because it was brushy area, and they're going to run a sickle bar through there. So I just dug this tree up, brought it home from work, and planted it. And the tree, the little sapling was maybe 15, 18 inches tall, maybe as big around as my thumb. And that was about 5 years ago. Now that tree, through my care and really stripping off a lot of branches, because I wanted to push the canopy up. I wanted to have a tall canopy.
Yeah.
That tree now is probably 25 feet tall, and at least it's over 2 inches in caliper. It's huge. It's a catalpa. Flowers are blooming, and it started off as a seedling as big as any of our thumb. That's all it was, and now it's going to be a tree forever.
I was just recently, I guess a couple months ago, was back visiting. I never knew my grandfather when he was alive. He died the year before I was born, but the house my dad grew up in, my daughter and I were walking by, and there's a bunch of horse chestnut trees along the road there that my grandfather had planted. And it's interesting to walk, I'm walking down the road under the trees with my 19-year-old daughter that my grandfather planted. It's always a different type of walking by a tree like that. So, it's
Yeah.
just because the tree, like it's been there and it's been growing and it's seen all these phases of, and I don't know why my grandfather planted the trees, probably just for aesthetics. He probably just wanted some trees around
Uh,
and stuff. But it's really kind of cool to be able to walk up to a tree and put my hand on it. My daughter can put her hand on it and know that my grandfather had his, a man that I never knew. And that tree ends up being that connection. It's hard to describe. It's quite moving. It's quite
yeah.
moving.
Yeah. Especially a living thing. I've got an arborist friend of mine whose dad ran a crane for building bridges, and the old erector set crane. Boom, not a crane not a hydraulic crane, but his dad's well retired, so it goes back to that era. And they could go driving around southern Minnesota, and his dad will say, "That's my bridge. I built that," and he did. His dad sat in the crane and craned all the iron up and everything for building these bridges. But it's different. We think it's different because we're connected to it. But a living thing, to take a living thing and saving it and transplanting it we did it 100%. And in the trimming too, that's gone on. There's a cool connection. Yeah.
Yeah, you often hear people talk about how it feels to go back to trees that, that they pruned, when for however many years, it could be 20 years, 30 years, whatever their career is. But, because of where they're working, they end up being able to prune, or it might be a friend tree. Like I have a lady here in town, just kind of a friend of the family that, she planted this mountain ash when it wasn't that big. And, she wanted some advice. So I pruned a little bit on it. And then over the years, the boys she'd give them, they would do little jobs on it. Right. And only recently, it was just last week, their boys are gone, they're growing up, and this tree's now quite large, and it needed a little trimming, nothing major, but it's like they just call us, and I was the first person that pruned it after it was planted, and then it's been like probably 15, 18 years since I've really done anything to it. I've helped the boys, but the last 2 or 3 times DJ's done it, and Zach. And now there I was by myself, doing it and seeing the cuts that they had made, and the tree's doing fine. And it is an interesting feeling, and that isn't even a big tree, but yeah, it's something that I don't know if roofers feel that way about putting shingles on another roof, or plumbers feel that way about fixing a pipe, but it's certainly something tree guys and tree gals can relate to.
Well, I had a conversation with another arborist friend whose dad was a plumber. He had a van with the racks on the top, and just the homeowners would call him to fix plumbing and put in a bathroom sink and stuff. And he said, and we're talking trees and stuff, of course, like we always do. Like when we get together, it's just normal. And he said, growing up, he never remembers his dad saying word one about his work. And he was a self-employed plumber. You'd think that he'd have an interesting story to tell about something, about going to a client's house and having a cute cat or a fun dog to play with, and tell the family about it. But not even a story like that. And his dad and I asked him, I said, your dad kind of a recluse or something like that? And he said, no, he just did his work. It was just work to him, where a lot of arborists, and of course, those of us, I call it, I got a saying that I don't bleed, I drip sap. Trees are quite a huge part of my life and our life, and our friends' lives. So it becomes much more than plumbing to us.
Yeah, well, that's an intriguing statement, Tom, and I think it's worth, it's one of the reasons, we call this the Human Forestry Podcast, and I think that there is a lot, like for many of us, maybe for some of us more than others, that we draw a parallel to trees and even in life, and our own life lessons can be augmented or are in fact influenced by our experience in the human forest. So like being in the tree forest influences our lives in the human forest, and there's a lot of similarities and parallels. I'm curious how you would relate to that, or how you would, what you would comment about that kind of statement.
Well, I'd have to think about that a little bit, but off the top of my head, finding people outside of our circle of arborist friends, I would say, for lack of a better word, civilians, people that are non-arborists, and I don't use it as a pejorative term either. It's not a put down or anything, but those it would be it's expected that we talk about trees and gear and all that sort of stuff, but to find a homeowner or somebody, in the elevator or on the street that's talking about trees and seeing their enthusiasm and people loving trees, or educating people about trees, people wanting, and now with starting my career off cutting down elm trees and finishing my career cutting down ash trees. It's kind of an odd set of bookends for my career, roughly 50 years in the trees,
Right.
with a lot of pruning in between and some planting, but that's the bookends. So there is a real human part of it, and making our living in the city, rather than in the woods.
Right.
Our trees always affect people, whether, good or bad, storms, or now disease trees, or, interfering with the roof of the house, yeah. A lot of human interactions.
Yeah. And do you think, like, as far as just energetically, or I guess soulfully or spiritually, do you think there's any parallels there, or do you describe, like, you talk about that catalpa, for example, with some fondness, or perhaps even reverence or pride? Do you think that in some way there's any of that imparted by the trees because they are a living thing? Like, is there potentially something there, or is it something that's drawn more from within us?
Well, the catalpa for me is probably one of the first trees that I learned the name of and kind of got to know it, because when I was in fourth grade, we moved. I had the upstairs bedroom, and outside my window, neighbor's tree, there was a catalpa tree. I could look out my window over the top of that and look about, a third of a mile away, and there's the Burger King. Well, to this day, and that was when I was in fourth grade, so, do the math. It was decades ago. That catalpa tree is still growing next to that house. It's not very big because there's two gigantic cottonwoods that have always overgrown it and kind of dwarfed this catalpa tree. So I've always liked catalpa trees, and people. So it has a meaning to me. It was being a tree that I grew up knowing, and we'd use the beans for swords and stabbing, because you could actually poke somebody with them like a real knife when we're playing army or whatever. We could have knife fights with them. Or a stick, you can't poke anybody with a stick. Catalpa beans, you bet, we can poke each other and actually have real knife fights and play knife fights. So there's a lot of meanings there, that besides the big giant elephant leaves and a wonderful smell of flowers. So catalpa is a real powerful tree for me.
Interesting. You mentioned that it was the first tree you learned its name of, and that, I've always found it fascinating. It's almost like like when someone's kind of got the tree bug, plant ID or tree ID is almost one of the first things that is your first passion or challenge. It seems like if someone's really interested in learning the names of trees and identifying different trees, they're usually good chance they're going to be hooked for life. It seems like. Would that be a fair assessment, or have you noticed that there's something about tree ID that is, I don't know, it's like a weird, I don't know, like a rite of passage almost, or like a secret right to getting into the forest,
Yeah. Yeah, it's a layer. It's another layer of involvement, getting closer or higher connection with a name, knowing the
Right.
names, and now with the various apps on phones, it's really
Yeah.
seemingly is pretty easy to do that. Although I follow a Facebook page about northern Minnesota, and some of the times that people are putting on there, what tree is this? And it's just this wall of green. It's like, well, we need a leaf sample, a close-up leaf sample. And the guesses that people come up
Right.
with is like, don't you ever use Google? It's like, this is really simple. And picking out the tree people. And somebody in there, somebody said, I think it's the larch. And so I put in there number one, the larch. And she wrote back, she said, I wondered if anybody else would get that. So even Monty Python fans are tree people. But it's a connection with trees. And a lot of people have that.
Well, I mean, there's kind of an interesting parallel, right? Like when you first meet a new person and you're interested in them, one of the first things you ask them is, "Hey, what's your name?" Right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think the same. I think you could draw a parallel with trees. Like when they're not just objects anymore, when there's something that's worthy of knowing, of studying, of learning about, then I think that's when, and I think to Dwayne's point, that's exactly right. That's kind of a litmus test for, you're. It's not just an object to you, right? You're really truly interested in it. You want to learn about it, so you start to know
Right.
its name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then realizing how many different types of trees there are, like people in the world, like it, and there's when you have a genuine interest in something, and I guess, I think about my journey in life, and that's, when you become genuinely interested in humanity and others and their well-being, like trees, life takes on a little different meaning and a different tone as well, like it does for people that care for trees or people that care for people. And I view them quite similarly. There's I can't care for every tree out there in the world, but I can certainly have the intention, right?
Well, and spending a good chunk of my career running a small commercial tree care company and meeting clients and doing estimates and finding people that knew names of trees. They kind of fall into groups. Some people knew the scientific names of trees, and then there's some people that just, it's a tree
Yeah.
and it bothers them. They don't need to know the name. It's just the tree on the corner of the house. So you have this spectrum, and to try and enroll people, but being careful not to overwhelm them with don't go to scientific names of somebody that wants the tree in the backyard. Okay, that's me. You're gonna be, it's too much for people to get into the scientific names or species and everything else like that. It's just a tree. But it's fun seeing people that homeowners uh, become learning more about the tree, wanting to learn more about the tree than it just being a tree in the yard.
Well, and I think it somewhat speaks to their own human condition as far as where they are on their path. And I don't think it's reflective of the age of the person. It's more reflective of the place where they're at, maybe spiritually or soulfully, to use those terms. But, as you become more aware of the fact that you're part of that we're all connected in this planet in some way, and and even trees are part of that, then those types of things take on different meaning, I think.
Yeah, and having I I had I would sometimes have seasonal questions that I'd ask a lot of clients. And one year I thought, I wonder how many times people in their lives would have interacted with an arborist. And so I'd ask people when I'm out doing this, and I said, since you were a little kid,
Huh.
did your parents ever have to call anybody to do tree work, or how did you? Why did you call me? Well, what is this? And most of the people, and I don't have the numbers, but an overwhelming number of people I would be the first person in their lifetime, first professional tree care person they would ever have called. And after asking that same question to a summer's worth of clients, I came to the conclusion that families and people and homeowners, they might call somebody twice in their lifetimes, and then we get those the clients that we really want that are repeats. They do it every couple of years. You go out to do them, but that's so rare. Most people only call once, and it's kind of sad, but that's just the way it is.
I think the tree care industry being, I guess, virtually unregulated, like there's really, at least certainly, I can't think of anywhere where, you have to be licensed in some way, shape, or form to provide a service. Well, or even if they do have some type of licensing or credential requirement, it's so loosely enforced or impossibly policed that virtually anyone that wants to call themselves an arborist or a tree person or a cutter or whatever they want to be can do so. And some evolve into actually caring about trees, and some it's just a cash job that requires no trading or whatever.
Yeah, and something that our profession hasn't done a good job with is pointing out to people what bad tree work is, and through the education and not having it in regulations, most people don't know what bad tree work is. They can hire somebody to come in and hire some hacks to do really bad work or cut down healthy trees or do whatever we would just cringe at. And they don't know that it's any different. The public hasn't really been educated to define what is good or bad. If you hire somebody to paint your house, the paint is going to flake off and you'll know what a good paint job is pretty quick. Yeah. Trees are so resilient, and they, like Dr. Scheigel would say, they tolerate our abuses too well. You can go in and do a real hack job on a tree.
Yeah.
Like I learned to do when I first started out in my evil Tom days, spiking, topping. Somehow Marv taught me collar cuts. He didn't know collar cuts, but we didn't leave stubs. He'd always have me, make what we know as a collar cut. And I learned that by just somehow. But people didn't know if topping was good or bad. That's what everybody did. I see more and more good tree work going on as I drive around and crane my neck when I'm looking for driving down the street and looking up the windshield, and I see a lot of really good tree work going on.
Yeah, it is. It is interesting though how, the trees, don't complain, or they, if you know what you're looking for, it can be obvious, or you can see signs of stress if you understand trees. But to some it may not look like that. I used to often say that, for someone that didn't understand drowning would look at a person drowning and think, man, can they ever swim? Where it's sort of like a tree's reaction to topping, is like a person's reaction to drowning. But what I find fascinating about that comment, Tom, is I know people, like even customers, that say, whatever you do, I don't like. There would be the odd one that would say, whatever you do, I don't want you to cut the tops off. That looks horrible. I don't know why people do that. And they don't know anything about trees, but yet they don't want that look, and they don't think it looks good when too much was cut or if the tops were cut. And it's like, and yet there's the next person down the road. Yeah, it's too tall. I need it short. Doesn't matter. They don't care. Like, how is it that some people perceive what looks good and what doesn't? Is that just like I like blue and you like red kind of thing? Or I find that really oddly interesting. It's it almost like politics, and what party you prefer, like how you can have people having such various views. It's really interesting.
No, it's what people have learned, and they've seen it before, and they just that becomes the norm for them. That's what they've seen. I've got some trees over here, actually not far from me, that I've got pictures of. For a while I tried to keep a scrapbook of then and now, or before and after pictures. And this guy had these two trees that he had me come in and pollard them, sort of. It's somewhere between topping and pollarding. But they had been done before me, and they're still done like that to this day. Well, this is because of looking. I don't know what the year is, but looking at the chip truck I had, this is by now from now. It's probably 40 years ago. And the guy that I worked for and did the work for, the guy that lived there, he'd be our dead grandpa. And the three of us was our age now. Because when I was there, I was probably in my 20s or so. And he was the grandpa then. So this has gone, in order to run the timeline out, this house has gone through at least a couple of owners since then. And they're still sort of pollarding, sort of topping these trees. And I remember it's not on my drive route. I'm going to go knock on the door, see if I can, catch up on the history. I'm not going to pollard them again, but just see why they've been recut. So it's the norm for them.
So Tom, you mentioned you started out, you called yourself Evil Tom or something like that. What can you tell us? How did you end up in the trees as a working arborist? Like, how did that all evolve for you as far as, and what was your first recollection of actually getting in a tree, like up in the air?
Well, the guy that lived next door to my folks always had a part-time job. He was a lineman for the phone company and always had a part-time beer money, cash job. And he did chain link fences for a while and then got into doing tree work. And he did tree work part-time. And his son and I were the same age. So we were either best friends or worst enemies. And Marv needed some help this one day. His regular helper wasn't available on Saturday. So I got this story from my folks years later. He came over and asked them on a Tuesday of the week, said, could Tom work for me on Saturday, dragging brush and cutting trees with just a handsaw and stacking brush in the trailer? And my folks talked it over and they asked me if I'd want to do it on Thursday. And I said, sure. Well, I was 12 years old. I mean, who doesn't want to make cash money and do man work, And so that was my first job, of dragging brush and stacking brush on a trailer. And I got to tell you, the way he told us to stack brush when I was 12 years old, there is no better way to stack brush on a trailer with a clam truck, anything. It is the best way. And I learned that on day one. So anyways, he had some really good things, but he was a hack. But somehow, he topped trees, and that's what I learned. He climbed with spikes. That's what I learned. We climbed with manila rope because that's what we had. Free climbing, just put the spikes on. Sometimes put a lanyard around the tree. Sometimes just bear hug. A lot of times get scared. Am I going to fall? Are my spikes going to cut out? I didn't. But he taught me. Then sometime in high school age or so, in college, he's climbing around, and I looked up in the tree and I thought, I want to do that. And he wasn't the kind of guy. We all know these guys that if you came up to him and said, would you teach me that? They just backhand us like, no, you're not worthy. Go away. So I started paying attention to what he was doing. And if I'd look at it and go, okay, he's going out there. He's going to want the chainsaw over there. So I would get the chainsaw and I'd set it over near where he was going to want me to tie it on. So I'd get ahead of him. I'd clear the brush on the ground where he was going to drop the next piles of brush, until finally he says to me, when we were driving the truck, he said, do you ever want to learn how to climb? Because he saw that I was paying attention. I was taking it up a level. And so he taught me to climb. And I've got a good memory of my first tree that I climbed.
Interesting.
It was a takedown. So I can't go back and visit it. But it was a Siberian elm that was for a lot clearing. Using a Mini Max 6 and a lineman's belt with a scare strap, and all the things that we did back then. But he taught me some really good stuff, that the bypass cut and snap cutting and doing some hinges and all that sort of stuff, and double roping stuff down. But using tools of the day, Manila rope. No, hemp
Right.
rope. Manila was expensive. He bought hemp because it was cheaper. So
Right.
that's what I started with.
Interesting. So where do you think he picked up those techniques, do you think, from, Tom? Like, was it an intuition thing, or do you think he learned them somewhere?
It had to have been what he just figured out. I've never asked him. I lost track of him, and I talk about this, trying to track him down. I should find him and see if he's still alive. He'd be probably in his 80s, so he's still could be living.
Yeah.
But to find out, as far as I can recall, he didn't work for anybody learning this. He figured this stuff out on his own. So, and we were taking down big American elms then. This is big American elms in Minneapolis in the early 70s, mid 70s. We were taking some big ones down.
Yeah.
A lot of roping and learning how to run friction and stuff. So and sometime along the line, going to Expo and reading the magazines and stuff, I started reading articles, and people are talking about these hacks and these, other various terms for these guys that were doing really poor tree work. And I thought, oh, that's me. I don't want to be that. So I started learning the proper way to do tree work. Took a Shigo session, quit using spikes, and paid attention to what was going on, what the right way to do trees. So to acknowledge my heritage, I just call that guy, that's Evil Tom. And it's funny, I've used that at
Evil Tom
sessions, like you picked up on it. And it's funny how a lot of people have evil fill in the blank, but don't want to admit it. They're embarrassed by it. But why? You didn't know any better.
Yeah.
You didn't know any better. If you didn't know any better, your feet can't be held in the fire. If you're doing something wrong and you keep doing it, that's a different case.
Yeah. And, I look back and I think about my journey and where I learned to climb and learned to prune. It just so happened to be that when I look back, it was serendipitous or fate, because it was a lawn company that formed this tree division to keep guys working over the winter. I had learned the Latin names of trees by working a summer job at university at a nursery. And because of that, I got fast tracked into getting a full-time work at this company, because the only reason they started the tree division was to keep losing guys over the winter. And I hadn't been working there long enough to earn that spot. But because I knew Latin and one of the guys didn't want to go to school, I got sent to school, and all of a sudden I'm on the tree department. And it just so happens that the guy that ran it was a Shigo zealot and had just been to a Shigo workshop. This is like 1988. And so I was like, well, we don't use spurs. We don't use spurs ever. It was like, they weren't just Shigofied. They were like, topping was not just wrong, it was evil. And my whole first experience was all around it. And my second experience was working at a company that didn't like Shigo, thought he was, a problem. Spurs were a very important tool, and maybe they shouldn't be used for pruning, but you had to really have a good reason not to use them. And that whole thing. And I realized later on, if I had started at that company, I would have been a Shigo hating, treetop and spur climbing SOB, and I wouldn't have thought anything of it. And I would have thought I was doing a great job. And as it was, I ended up being probably more of a Shigo zealot. I learned that spurs were very valuable for removals, and I was glad to learn how to use them, like after 3 years of never having used them, including for removals. So it's interesting how circumstances, like you say, and I don't, it was just, I had no choice in where I started in this tree world business, but it influenced everything I did after. And, you make a good point there. And it's not to be ashamed of. And I think it is important to talk about where you're from. I think it's part of just being able to accept yourself and where you're at too, to not shame can be a powerful thing. And when you realize you did something wrong, that shame or that, I guess it's shame can move in and it should be something that the only way to release it is to talk about it in some ways, I think. And, but it is an interesting, you know, how that all happens is quite fascinating. The fact that you grew up beside this individual that, started his own tree company or tree cutting for cash. And that's how, where you learned, but yet you moved on beyond that into finding Shigo and then changing your ways and seeing, and all the while, like, as long as I've known you, Tom, you've been open and honest about discussing whatever, like without fear of reprisal or concern. It's just factual and open and honest, which is a pretty good quality, or an interesting quality. Not everyone is raised to have that quality.
Well, thank you. That kind of tees in with what I was starting to say. So I was perfect to have you finish that. Is that, in my life course, I think about the odd serendipity of growing up and having parents that camped and we went out in the woods and did all that woodsy stuff, and then ended up being next door to a guy that did tree work. Like, what is the chance of that? It was very life forming, very, very important circumstances. And then, getting into doing this, and along the way, I worked with our chapter, the Minnesota Society of Arboriculture, was in there when we had our vision statement and our, what do they call that? When you come down with a company, the goals of the company, it's not vision. Vision statement is part of it. We went through this whole process. So I did that. And then I did that with another company that I worked for. And as I was going through this with this company, I thought to myself, what's my vision statement? I mean, if I did this with this chapter, and I could see it making a difference and focusing with the chapter, and this company is doing it. So I thought up my own. I spent some time and came up with my own vision statement, and what it came out is that I want old healthy trees and old healthy people that take care of them. So very, very succinct. And if it doesn't fit that, I don't do it. And that really helped me focus on what I do, and the way I look at climbing, the way I look at taking care of trees. If it's not for the benefit of the tree or for the benefit of the tree worker, we don't do it. And we've got regulations, we've got standards, we've got peer pressure, and all of that. But all of that aside, that's just the enforcement part of it. I don't need that to say I know it's right because it's good for the person. We could spend hours talking about one-handed chainsaw use. We won't, but that's a topic that comes up, and to look at people and talk with people about it and go, we do that because it's dangerous not to, not because it says it in the Z133, and not because it's a bad practice. It's just dangerous. It's not good to do that. So don't do it. You could do that for a long time, because one-handed chainsaw use has led to too many, and we've all seen them. We've seen the cuts that they make, and they are ugly. They are ugly.
Right. Well, that goes back to what you were saying about, your journey. Like when you learn, you don't do what you used to do because you learned how to do it differently, and you honor that or appreciate it because you let the learning change your doing. And I think that's, it's like listening versus hearing. People hear not to one hand, but they don't listen. They don't really synthesize what's being said. There's something in there about being present and able to like the difference between learning and listening.
Yeah. Does it get absorbed? Does it go into practice? Are you considering it? You don't have to, if a change comes up, you don't know some changes, you should look at them, and there's some things you should change right away. You should get rid of that. And just to keep the metaphor of that as one-handed chainsaw use, you should just not do that. Once you realize it, you should just not do that. Pruning with spikes, free climbing, you learn about how to set ropes so you're not free climbing trees. You just do that. Then there's stuff that you should look at and just go, that's interesting. It doesn't fit what I want to do now, but to look at it, to absorb it. Some new tool, a climbing tool, some new way of climbing, the whole single rope technique, and how the huge change that's brought to the world for not just accessing the tree, but working the tree. It's changed the way the climbers work trees. And it's also, and I said this when I was first starting to putter around with it, I got flack for this like you wouldn't believe. And I'd say, SRT is the future of tree climbing. And people would pshaw that and just go that, you're right, Tom. Yeah, it's true. I could see that, and some people could see that. They'd look at it, and I could just see that. Like when you're teaching anything, people get that look over their face. Their total whole face just changed. Like, yeah, it works.
Yeah,
and to see that, and having people that, I got people into SRT that were in their 50s and 60s that thought that they were done climbing, but with single rope, they were able to, continue climbing for another 8-10 years comfortably and still have fun at it.
Yeah.
It extended their careers.
Yeah, no, I remember long before the craze really took off, feeling very similarly that I didn't know exactly how it was going to transpire, but I knew that it was going to be, I just was like an innate feeling that it's going to be, we're going to figure out how to manage the friction and the load. And, the wrench really was kind of the one that it was the, I don't know, the holy grail for that change to occur, and its whole evolution. But yeah, I remember as a climber, for me, where I really started seeing it as possible was when the hitches changed and seeing how the hitches could react differently, particularly with the advent of the Masha truss in particular, because I remember climbing, it wasn't SRT, but I would use a Masha truss on a footlock, doubled line, but I used such a large, one time I can't remember how I came about it, but I made a really large loop. So the thing was just like, it was really large. So there was like probably 10 wraps, and what I was doing was storm work. So I had to go up, knock out a rusted branch, and get down and go to the next tree. That's it. Like, it was like, just get the hangers, the big ones out. We got to do as many as we can. And we're going through boulevards and one after the other. Throw your line up. Well, to put a saver up and everything, forget it. I would just go over a limb. I'd tie on this big mashaw that I would do the ultimate sin of reaching above it, because I didn't have it way long. I wanted to be able to reach it. So I'd push it up and I'd just footlock up. And then I was like, well, now I'm sitting here hanging in this big mashaw. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could dare try. Could I dare try? And I would gingerly pull on it, like, hey, I could lower myself without burning it with very good control. I could stop and let go. And then I could, there's one over there. I could swing over, and I could even, I would literally look around, like, is anyone watching? Hey, and I could scooch out a limb a little ways with this big fat diaper-like hitch. And I could go and I could prune another hanger out, swing away, but I would use it with like as if I was breaking some sort of like ritualistic law. I was sinning beyond all measure, but yet I'm going, man, this works. There is something to this. There's got to be there. This makes sense, but there was such a lash out against it, as you speaking of, Tom, that I basically kind of just put a lid on it. I didn't even like talking about the fact that I did that. Yeah. But I remember there was one summer in particular, this has got to be in like the early 90s, and I did days of it. I got to the point where I would put a prusik on the mashaw, or I put a beater on the mashaw, and then I extended it with just a piece of cordage so I could footlock normally. And then I would go up, take a lock, reach above it, the hitch, which is the sin. And then I wouldn't have to undo any carabiners, and I could clip into my belt. So now I had a short one. And I would just let that loop hang down on my legs, and then I'd work the tree with but I never could make it work with the Val de Tain because it was too tight, but the Machaw would work like a dream.
Yeah, that there's these little pinpoints of people doing this, kind of stumbling down this street and finding like you did, like, well, I wonder if, what if, and I was at a buddy's house, and George was renting a room from this guy who was a caver, and I'm looking at the guy's library, and he had the book, a bunch of caving books and stuff, and then he had this book called On Rope. And I pulled it off and I started thumbing through it, and I looked at it and I go, oh, this is cool. This is cool. Yeah. So I went to Half Price Books and bought a used copy of the first edition of On Rope. And I read that cover to cover.
Yeah.
And I looked at this and I started incorporating some of the things and the ideas that cavers were doing on rope, ascending and descending, but they had the changeover. And so that was like, I started skinning out of that. Like, what can I get from this book? And from these guys who have been climbing up and down ropes for years, there's bits and pieces of this we can use. And so I started incorporating different things and getting rid of the doubled rope ascent and using an ascender with T-bars, and for hands and feet, and just various chest ascenders and various things. And then On Rope 2 came out, the second edition, got that, read that. And it's funny that On Rope 2, it's read that the chapter on tree work in On Rope, the second edition, is terrible. Yeah. But it's such a great book. It's just like, who wrote that? I'm going to get kicked in the shins for saying that, but it's just odd. But a great book, Everybody should read it. And it's a piece of history. And while I was doing that, like you, by this time we got synthetic ropes and all of these hitches that are doing all kinds of different really cool things are coming up, and different cords and all that. Yep. That revolution is injecting in there. So I spent a season. I spent from snow melt in March through snows of November, December, trying every different rope and hitch combination I could to try and come up with a hitch that I could work SRT. I couldn't quite get it. I'd get hitches that would go up and lock, but they wouldn't lock going down. And it's like I never kept records. It was like, nope, that didn't work. Nope, that didn't work. So spring of 05, April of 05, I was at Long Beach TCIA Expo. Yeah. And I'm standing at the Arborware booth talking to guys, and I look down the trade show floor, and down at the Cheryl booth, they've got ropes hanging there, and I'm pretty familiar with the tools that are out there. And I look at the booth, this is down a couple of roads at Expo, and I look down there, and I see some shiny piece of aluminum, and the crow in me goes, got to go see that shiny piece of aluminum. Yeah. And there's Morgan Thompson with the Unisender. And he's just standing on the ground, just holding it and sliding it up, and they can come down. And I saw that, and we intersected, and it's like the world just changed. The timeline of tree climbing just changed right here in the Unisender. Here's the tool that goes up and down the ropes. That's the beginning of SRT, because there's no changeover, and rope goes straight through. And then Kevin came up with the rope wrench, and it took me a long, long time to figure out why because the Unisender does it for me. Rope wrench is a great tool. There's some things that it doesn't do for me, but not to down talk it or anything. But it took me a long time to figure out why do tree climbers like the rope wrench, and finally I figured it out. It's because tree climbers, we know friction on rope, like you did. Like you figured out, like you just put a bunch of tools in there. You can make it do things that are kind of odd. You're out there on the fringe, but you found a solution by being out on the fringe, and you would use that to your advantage. So it's just these odd little quirks, and people were doing that with ropes and hitches. And here Morgan did this, and then but that's all metal. It's all tool.
Right.
Kevin kept a rope in there, the hitch in there, the friction hitch, And arborists, we're comfortable with that because we know that. We know
Right,
that.
right.
It's our little, our blankie that we drag around. We know that. So that's cool. And it doesn't make any difference. I mean, people knew how big a fan I was of the
Yeah.
Unicenter. And they thought I'd be talking them down. It's like, well, I don't make a dime off the selling them. I just like them. Whatever
Yeah.
it does, whatever it takes to get people on SRT, it's better for you too. It's the future of tree climbing. It saves your shoulders. All these different things that it does over doubled rope. That's another tool.
It's interesting, how you go from the unicenter and then the wrench, and now you've got like the Petzl chicane with the zigzag, which is, now again hitchless, but is quite a bit of acceptance, and maybe it's part of that progression.
Yeah, yeah, and to see all these. I mean, I look at pictures of stuff on Facebook, and I made a comment. There's a guy had I don't know what SRT system it was. I think it was a rope wrench based, but he had all these carabiners and swivels and hitches and connections. It was like this complicated thing. And the picture was really busy, so it was really hard to figure out what was going on. It wasn't a really well put together picture. But I remember people in the early days of the Unicenter saying, "Oh, all of those parts there, all those parts, those rivets, those parts could fail." And I was like, that was their down talk. That was their trash talking. The Unicenter had all those parts, and I said, "Yeah, just like those airplanes we fly in, the cars that we fly. There's a lot of parts there. They don't fail. Good grief." But that was their complaint. And I look at this setup this guy had, and I look at it and I go, well, that's really complicated, but it works for him. It's all okay. I wouldn't use it because there's just too much stuff going on.
Yeah.
But, people are doing really fantastic things and going for, that little bit of efficiency. And if it keeps the person healthy, doesn't wear your shoulders out, keeps you healthy so you climb as long as you want. So that's good. That's great.
Well, Tom, you mentioned Facebook. You mentioned Facebook, Tom, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about. And I don't know that everyone's fully aware. I think a lot of people are, but Mark. We had Mark on the show. Actually, the last interview we did, I think, was with Mark. But Tree Buzz has been around a long time and it's got a lot of notoriety. It's like it's kind of an institution, and you're quite active in that and a big part of that. I was just curious what you'd have, how you got involved and started with that, and what it does for you today, because I think you're still pretty active in the Buzz, and maybe not the face of the Buzz in the way that Mark is, but you're certainly a big part of it.
Yeah, it's Mark and I had known each other. We'd met at competitions and stuff. So we were buddies. I wouldn't say we were friends at the time. We were buddies. Good. I mean, that's which is not to say anything bad, but we weren't friends. So we were, because he lives in Jersey. I live in Minnesota. So I'd see him at competitions and stuff and workshops and we'd chat and stuff. So he gave me a call in the fall of 2000. And he said he had this idea for a discussion forum. And then we talked. He says, I want to talk to you about it and see about getting it going. And we did. We shot some ideas back and forth, and what it would look like, what the feel of it would be like. And then in the winter of 2001, he asked me if we wanted to partner up. And I said, "You mean like business partner, like work with you on that?" And he said, "Yeah. I could see you doing this stuff and I do this stuff and we'd be partners on it." And I was like, it really set me back that he'd asked me to do that because of one, we're so far apart, but really that doesn't make any difference. Like the three of us are all far apart too. So it doesn't make any difference.
Yeah.
So that was in 2001, we started Tree Buzz, and the ideas that we had for the way it would run is kind of the way it still runs. The social media has changed. So it's kind of a dinosaur in the whole social media. It's almost a sticks and bricks kind of thing. But it's fun seeing the value that people have found there, and see old threads people dig up. People go back. There was just a thread that somebody dug from the aughts. I don't know, it was aught 3 or something like that. And that it in its original iteration, it had maybe 30 comments. And just in the last couple of weeks, it's gotten 30 or 40 more. That's cool. I think that's cool to have that there's that stuff that's there to go search and to bring that discussion forward. Where Facebook, it's ephemeral. It's like flowers. They come and go and they're done. If you didn't get a picture of it and put it in your file, you're not going to go back and see that flower. Facebook happens this week,
right,
or this day, or now, and you're done with it. And that's it. Where Tree Buzz is there, and people have found value in it, and I'm really pretty proud of the place it is, and see how people use it. And the traffic certainly isn't there as much as it was when we started, but that's social media. It's still busy.
Yeah, well, I think you should be proud of it, Tom. I think it like as I mentioned earlier, it's like it's an icon, or it's here to stay. It's always going to be part of the tree care industry, and certainly part of those that are really part of the human forest, or part of the arborist industry. And in a sense, I still think that the people that learn the names of trees, that I think there's a strong correlation with the people that know the names of trees and care what they're called are also the ones that probably don't one hand very often. But they're also the ones that are on Tree Buzz. They're also the ones that spend time outside of work thinking about trees and tree work and tree stuff, and then are also the same people that probably draw parallels into their own lives, and how that integrate their learnings from trees into how they even live. And Tree Buzz is certainly part of the human forest and part of arboriculture, and you should be proud of it. I think it's always going to be here to stay, and we're happy that Tony just recently put a link on Tree Buzz for the podcast, and in a lot of ways, it's exactly part of the reason of this podcast. Don Blair commented. We interviewed Tom or Don. Well, probably one of our first interviews was with Don, and his comment was that Dwayne, this is a really good thing you guys are doing, because when one of us dies, a library burns down, and to have this kind of thing documented or recorded, it's kind of like what you were getting at with the Tree Buzz thing. These recordings that are occurring here are going to be there for time immemorial for people to go back and listen to and talk about, and listen to some of the history, of the human forest and of arboriculture. So it's fascinating. About you've had some interactions with Don Blair as well, I think, if I'm correct, Tom.
Oh yeah. Don was he's on my Mount Rushmore. He's one of the characters on my Mount Rushmore, with Shigo and my Marv, my mentor. That's my Mount Rushmore. And I've thought of having somebody actually see if I get Brian Kotwicka do my Mount Rushmore of tree influencers. But I met Don.
That's really
what was it? It was called Arbor Expo, I think, that Arbor Age magazine did in 1986. He was doing a talk, and I remember sitting there watching him. He's doing this talk about speed lining, what became speed lining, and I'm watching this slideshow and hearing this guy, this character, just entertaining as hell, talk about this thing. And I'm sitting there at the expo and leaning forward, looking at this, and my jaw dropped open. I'm just slack jawed looking at this thing. And all of a sudden I realized that I'm scooched out on my chair, and my butt is almost on the edge of the seat. Literally. I always thought that was just a silly term, but I was ready to fall on the floor, and I had to stop, hitch myself back up, and sit back in my chair. And I look down the row back and forth, and that's what everybody's doing. They're sitting there with their jaws dropped open. Nobody's saying anything, going, "What the heck?" trees can go up? You're joking. And we can, speed lining? That is just too cool. And so afterwards I went up and talked to him and started our friendship.
Yeah. I would have to say that Don is one of the first edutainers in the tree care industry that I ever had, and he didn't make it just informative. It wasn't just learning. It was fun and damn interesting. And, probably his greatest asset, like all great teachers, is his ability to tell stories.
Yeah. Yep.
So I wonder, Tom, what is your favorite Don Blair story?
Having him read when the Oak Man met the Uke Man. Having Don read that in character. That's a good one.
Right. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that'd be. He's agreed to. He really enjoyed the podcast, and he said he'd like to do another one. And Tony, that might be now that Tom's brought that up, we can seed that. Maybe that's something we can get Tom to do a special episode on Don reading in character the Oak Man and the Uke Man and how they met.
Well, and people know that Don's dad was an arborist. His dad wrote an arboriculture book, and I found copies of that. I haven't seen one come up for sale for quite a number of years, but I got a copy of Don's dad's book, and on arboriculture. Wow. And it's really cool to read it and see what was in practice and the standard, the sharp point of what arboriculture was in the 30s, and compare how much of the stuff we were doing then we're still doing has stayed right. And a few things have changed, obviously. But to have Don's dad's book sitting up on my shelf along with Don's book up there too. So
right. Wow, that's interesting.
And it's funny, as I got to know Don, I thought he'd kind of acted like a guy that was older than me. Well, it turns out Don's only a year older than me. He's 1 year. And I've realized because he grew up with his dad's friends as a young man. He grew up with his dad's friends who were a generation older than the guys you and I would hang around with. He was a generation older. So Don is a guy to me that really bridges a generation there between a generation older and the guys of our generation. But he seemed, when I first got to know him, I thought he was in calendar years. I thought he was 10, 15 years older because of his references and different things like that. But he's only a calendar year older. So,
well, that means you must, because he just turned 80.
No, 70.
Wasn't it 70? Oh, sorry. Yeah, because his birthday, we interviewed him. Wasn't it like just a week after his birthday, Tony, or right before? Right around his birthday is when we interviewed him.
Yeah, it was pretty close. I don't remember. It was just before.
70.
Just
that's right. It was 70, not 80. 70. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah,
so you're 69. Then I would have to infer.
Yep.
No, not 80. Not 80. Well, before we finish this, I made a note, and I want to go back to it before I forget. But you piqued my curiosity, and I'm sure there's other listeners that are probably, this is in the back of their mind, because you talked about stacking brush on a trailer, and that you learned to this day it's still the best way. And I'm wondering if there's any way that you can describe what that is. Because everyone's always interested in learning a better way. And I will tell you this, my son spent the summer between 11 and 12 working for Mark Bridge at Bum Partner in Basel. He spent, and he came back from there with the ability to stack brush on anything like I'd never have seen before. Like he could fit more material in a truck box than I've ever seen in my life. And because they packed everything on wagons there. He
Oh
only
yeah,
used the chipper one time, so he learned how to. And they had this weapon, this tool that was like a hatchet type of thing, and they would chop everything and pack and stack and pack and stack. So I'm curious if I can't help but ask
yeah.
if you could somehow describe what
Well,
it was and how you did it.
Marv's trailer was a little single axle trailer. Had probably 12-inch sides on it, and we'd start off with a couple of really long, low fan branches on the bottom. Make a nice layer of fan branches, and kind of lay them down
Yeah,
and interweave the branches, not from one side to the other, but lay one on the left, one on the right, one in the middle, stagger them. So you kind of weave this mat, and then you get in there and somebody would be on the trailer stomping everything down, and you can cross break stuff so it weaves this bottom layer of branches together, and stomping all the time, packing those branches into the corner. And you throw another one on there, and
yeah,
sometimes, so you don't have these big Y branches. Try and trim the stuff so it's pretty straight, and throw it in. And what you do is you start in some pattern. It's the front right, front left, back right, back left. So you start 4 layers or 4 piles, and you kind of rotate around and build in the corners and layer up. And it should always, the top of the pile should always be pretty flat. And you
yeah.
rarely ever put anything in the middle. You just build these layers up. And I remember Marv going, before he went up the tree on that first
Uh-huh.
job when I was 12, he says, and I want you guys out there jumping on that stuff. And he says, if I see that thing piled up and start turning it into a hay pile and getting round, he says, you're going to know you're going to hear from me. And he's up in the tree, and his son Steve and I'm up on the top of this hay pile, jumping around and bouncing on it like it's springy, like a trampoline. And Marv, he didn't drop an F-bomb, but he said some curse word, and it was the first time I ever heard an adult shout a curse word. And we were goofing off, and we were stacking wrong, and it was kind of funny in hindsight. But you're 12 years old doing a man's job, and the man curses at you. It was like, whoops, that's wrong. We had to tear that pile apart and relayer it. And I didn't know it at the time. I know we were only stacking brush. After a while, when you do that, everything comes out, and you grab all of those that bottom layer of branches, and everything comes out as one. It's all one big tight glob, and
Yeah,
there's no wasted space by carefully placing in the corners, butts to the back. And it's just the most efficient. And when
yeah,
I had my
yeah,
clam truck, I did the same thing. I start in the corners with the butts to the back. So I've
yeah,
had guys, when I was running my company, guys would come on and I'd say, oh no, we do it this way, and they do their way, and I go. After a while, I just thought, okay, show me, I can learn. And they'd pack this pile, and I'd
yeah,
go stop, and I said, and I'd have to go into the saw and cross-cut branches to take the air out of the pile because they had fluffy piles, and they
yeah,
would convert.
yeah.
So that's what I've done. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's funny because yeah, well, it was very similar because DJ described, and he brought pictures. I never handled the tool, but it was like some medieval weapon. Like it kind of looked like a field hockey stick,
Oh
but it
yeah,
had like a blade that was kind of like a scythe, but it was really thick. Like it
yeah,
was it was heavy, and it was probably 4 feet long, but it wasn't an axe. So the back of it was flat, but it
yep,
came like it was wide and then narrowed, and it was incredibly sharp. Like DJ said, you could chop an arm off in one swing, no problem. Like you could whip it through a 3-inch diameter limb with force as long as it was green wood with one swing. It would just
yep,
chop it. And they would stack, and then they would swing this and chop everything to get all the air pockets out. It would just shrink down, and they would just keep stacking it like that.
yep.
And he said
That's
no
all.
one got near the guy on the trailer because he'd be flailing this weapon, right? That was like it was crazy, but it was sharp as all get out.
There's a thread on Tree Buzz that just from last week. A guy lost his favorite a felling axe, lost it in the woods, and then he found it. You found it again, but it started a thread about using axes and a grub hoe is what they were calling those, and I've seen those before. It's a big curved thing,
Yep.
and how well they. I've seen them. I've never used one, but I've seen them, and I can say, yeah, that would really work. And I don't know if I thought this idea or if I commented about it, but I thought about using that, and I didn't use chopping tools for, cutting branches off. And it's like, and I got to thinking about this during this thread was going on. It's like, why didn't I use chopping tools for limbing? We'd use them for chopping roots. Not everybody would use a chopping tool, but never for brushing out. And I realized, I've got enough training and safety and dangerous things to do that everybody has to buy into. I didn't want to add chopping tools to the work plan. It's like, no, if you need to take a branch off, use a handsaw. Okay. I can teach you guys how to use handsaws. They're pretty safe, and you don't need 12 feet around you when you go with that brush hoe or brush axe. You need a good 10, 12 feet. Nobody goes there. I didn't want to teach that. I'm going to stay away from that. But I've watched videos of people using them. It's like, if you don't know what they do, it's like, they are wicked looking.
I was just curious what Tony's experience is with chopping things.
I hate trailers and stacking brush on it. I've been very fortunate. We've always had a lot of chippers and really big chippers to process stuff. I've been very fortunate from that. But I do got to tell a bit of a story, Tom. I got to tell the origin story of when I first met you, which leads into what I'd like to next. So it would have been 1998, and it would have been the Arbor Master competition at Stevens Point, Wisconsin.
Oh.
And I was there as a competitor. And I remember you being there, and you were just climbing. I'm not sure why you were there, but you were there in attendance. And I remember you setting up hammocks, and I think that's the first time I met you. Well, I know that was the first time I met you, but then that leads to another person that was there was the person that then became a good friend of all of us on this, and that was Peter Donzelli. And one of the I guess metaphors or allegories we use for the human forest is even when a tree passes on and falls down and is no longer living in the forest, it still gives back constantly. And there's a lot of people in the human forest and in arboriculture. And I know for me that Peter's been one of those. I'm just interested in, what's your best Peter Donzelli story? Because I think the reason I asked this is one, I'm curious, but I think, one of the reasons Dwayne and I started this podcast is it became apparent to us that there's a lot of people in the industry that really don't know the history of a lot of what goes on. They know the technique, or they don't know the backstory. And Peter was such a huge part of so much backstory. So I'm just interested in your best just a really good Peter Donzelli story, because he was always a blast.
Yeah, Pete was a great guy, a dear friend, and I think of him a lot. There's a lot. I've got things in my life that are Pete things that pop up. But one of the cool stories I like is I got invited to meet up with a bunch of arborists out in Colorado to go skiing for a week, stay at a condo and ski. And Pete and I both skied telemark. So that, and Pete was a better skier than me, but he could slow up his skiing so I could keep up with him. And we spent so much time in the lifts talking about tree stuff and what he was learning about trees, talking about what he did as a engineer, and of course telemark skiing, and how we got into tree work and stuff like that. So we just, my jaw was tired from talking with him so much and having just a great time. And so there's a saying with telemark skiing: half the binding, twice the fun. And I've kind of adopted that for SRT, is half the rope, twice the fun. And it's kind of a little tick to Pete. But you're right. There's Pete's name has it's not known anymore, which is too bad. And there's things that he gave us. He took our path and pivoted. We pivoted off of Pete, and he left behind such a different track for us, looking about the dynamics of tree and understanding friction and loads and stuff like that. He added that engineering part to trees that we would have probably gotten to, but not as quickly and not as gracefully as Pete took us. And yeah, a dear friend.
Yeah, you mentioned pivot points, or like the tree care industry was changed forever when you saw the unisender, and there's moments in time where you realize how much of an impact something has. And I when Pete passed, I mean, I was very close to. I was one of the first people to hear about it, and I didn't realize at the time, partly just because of grief and the tragicness of the event, but what has transpired from that, like, it's really quite staggering, the amount of learning and research that Pete's death in particular has spawned. Like, it's just like, I don't think a lot of people realize just how many things and how many people were affected by his passing, and how much it's improved and changed the industry. It's really unfortunate that it took that, his passing to do that, but it's also, I guess, pleased that, I don't know if that's the right word, but that I'm glad that so much learning has at least come out of that particular tragedy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I bring it up, and I like to mention it often, is because I don't think people realize, when Pete passed, that was in 2000 after his accident, what a watershed moment that really was for many of us personally that knew him. But then just as an industry in general, I think, we really started to take a serious look at what we were doing and how we were doing it. Because I know for me, from my experience, the lesson I learned was, if it could happen to Pete, it could happen to me. And I'd never thought that way before at that age in my life. And, I look at it, from the tragedy it goes, it's, like, it's somebody that, like, loses a limb, right? It's like, they often say, well, where'd you lose your limb? It's, if you lose it in combat or in service of your country, you didn't lose it, you gave it, right? And they often know right where they gave it, so it wasn't something lost. So I look at Pete's passing as something like that. It's not that we lost Pete, it's what he gave us when he did go. And I think it's
Right.
important that people understand. And they say you're never gone as long as someone's always mentioning your name. So there's people like Pete that I continue to mention their names because, in my mind, he's not gone. And I think it's important that people understand that history. And if people get anything from this podcast and discussions we've had, the tools and techniques are great. But really just to have that appreciation for where we've come from, because you really have to understand that.
Well, and not only that, Tony, but the willingness to learn and discuss. I think Pete's incident, was the most researched or talked about fatality that may have ever existed or happened. And that's partly why the learning that has come out of it. It's, I think that, the fact that there's still a lot of fatalities occurring, but most of them don't get the attention that Pete's did. And that's a tragedy, but Pete's fatality got such a reaction and got so much discussion, and whether all of the facts were discussed accurately, or, like Stanley would always say, it was never properly investigated. Nobody really knows what happened. But the fact is, everyone was talking about it and did try to learn from it, I think. And it wasn't just a matter of saying, well, it wouldn't happen to me. I think, and even the amount of, even the fact that we have the fatality statistics we do now is an homage to Pete. People don't realize that, when Shane did the research, when he decided to do his project the year after Pete's death on his master's thesis, he went to Washington to get the accident statistics for Arborist, which they didn't know about. They're like, Arbor what? And then they only kept records for 10 years. Well, because Pete died in 2000, Shane was in 2001 doing this. They only had records to 91. And that's why to this day, whenever you see a reference to Arborist fatalities, it goes to 1991. And that's because of Pete. Even that number, and I don't think people realize it was 2000, or Pete died. 2001, Shane did the research. They had records for 10 years. That's where 91 comes from. Like that in of itself is monumental, you know, that he has that legacy attached to him because you always see the reference there. And I always try to point that out to people because to me, it's part of just paying honor to the gift, as you put it, Tony, that he gave us.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel so fortunate in my career. Tony, I didn't realize that that's when we met. That's cool. I've got a couple of pictures.
Yeah.
From Stevens Point. I'll have to dig those out and see if you're over in the corner there or something. But yeah, I remember going to Point. Yeah.
I think my other great claim to fame there is I think I am responsible for the leg scabbard. All right, because I was competing, right, and so one of the competitions was, you had to spike up a pole and you had to make a face cut and rig it off, chuck in a block, and it had to be very precise. So I had a straight bladed handsaw, and I literally on the back of it, the non-tooth side, I put grooves so that I could literally measure my cuts. And I would always have a hard time like reaching around the back and pulling it out. Although I could always get the handsaw off, but getting it back in was clumsy.
Yep.
So I'm like, well, I got these spikes on. I didn't know of a thing of a leg scabbard, so I just taped it to my leg. And I would practice that way, right? Because first place was like $5,000, and I'm like, man, I could really use $5,000. So I practiced it. So anyway, I'm there, I'm competing, and I can remember Norm Hall was a judge, and obviously, everybody's there. It's a pretty big thing, and Peter's there, and he's a competitor as well too. And I get out and I'm getting ready to go, and I'm taping my handsaw onto my leg, and there's a bunch of people from Buckingham standing over there, and they're like. And I swear to God, next year they came out with a leg scabbard. So that's my claim to fame. I would just like to go on record as being the man that started the leg scabbard. It's probably not true at all, but that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Well, there's a calendar timeline.
You heard it here, folks.
Yeah. I don't know if it's true or not.
Tom might just have the photograph with that handsaw's taped to your leg, and then now you got something.
Right. That was also the time too. I think. Well, Scott wasn't there, but through that, I used to have this great picture, and I lost it somewhere in a computer transfer. But I had a picture of me literally rigging a chunk off of a spar with Scott Profit on the porter wrap, lowering it. I'm like, that was pretty cool. I think I could still recreate that picture to this day, so I might have to because I can't find the original.
Oh,
interesting.
Yeah.
Sort of like getting a karate picture taken with Bruce Lee.
The first ITCC I went to with Jeff Jepson was Hilton Head, and the day after the climb, people were just climbing down at the park, and I'm hanging out down there, and I get a picture of Bettis doing some crazy knot thing with a split piece of round bead that I don't know what it was, but it was some weird thing that really worked, that he made work. And then I've got another picture of this young kid, must have been, I don't know, he looks like he's about 7 years old, getting ready to climb up in this tree. And I'd step back, and it's Jared Arbergino. And I'm standing there.
Oh, yeah.
What's his dad's name?
Gary.
I see his face. I haven't talked to him for so long. But Gary is talking with Jeff, and Jared is there climbing. I've got a picture of Jared when he's like 7, 8 years old. Who would have thought? So those pictures, to go back there and look at those and look in the background and see who you might see, and see these stories like this. Like, I didn't know that we met then. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
It's ironic. It's ironic as well, Tom, because I believe you and I met for the first time. I want to say it was at Stevens Point, or it was definitely at an SCA thing. But I thought it was Stevens Point, but maybe it was somewhere else. Maybe it was somewhere in Minnesota. But it was definitely an SCA event, and Tim Walsh was there as well. That was the first time we met. But I can't place exactly where when it was.
It would have had to been the competition if it was, because that was the Student Society of Arboriculture meeting, and Tim Walsh was there. They were like hosting it for us. Dan Kraus was there competing. I know Peter. I'm trying to think who else would have been there. Good. it's really breaking my brain to think of it too much. But,
yeah.
Could have been then.
Could have been. Could have been. That was because there was a lot going on. There was a lot going on that week. There was more things than just the skills competition because of the SCA event.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Fun hearing the first contact stories.
We always reach about this time period. We're at almost an hour and a half, and it might be one of the longest ones we've had. But they kind of draw. It seems like anywhere between 70 and 90 minutes is almost like a natural kind of segue to where the biology of the body takes over and other factors come into play. But I'm sure we could go on, and you may be a candidate for a sequel, Tom, if you found it interesting enough, and we could maybe do it again sometime.
Sure. It was great fun filling in little details.
Yeah, it's been great talking with you, Tom.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Just want to thank you for taking time to share and spend time sharing your thoughts and sharing your most valuable non-renewable resource, time. And anyone that's listening, thanks to you as well.
Good deal. Take care, guys.
Thanks.